Hey everyone, welcome to Bitcoin Banter. I've got Tony here with me. We've got some big news from the week, and we'll wrap it up with an example of Clown World, which I think you'll have a good time with. So appreciate you being here. Let's jump right in, Tony. I'm gonna share my screen and okay, so. The Bitcoin historian Pete Rizzo said that exactly 3 years ago today, and this will be when this comes out 3 days ago, President Bukele took the stage at Bitcoin 2021 to announce El Salvador would be the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, and the world was forever changed. So, Tony, my question is, it seems to be there's some indication that this is a trend that is likely to continue at some point. That said, it kind of feels like this MicroStrategy thing that it's like we're waiting on like when's the next brave person going to step forward and do something about it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on who you think might be next, if you have any thoughts, what countries or nations might adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, and what maybe you think is holding them back. I mean, it's been 3 years now.
Well, I mean, this whole thing comes down to the the old age topic of masculinity. Real leaders, make a stand. Real leaders don't look around for validation. Real leaders don't really care about what other people are doing. If they genuinely believe in a cause and they know it's the right way to do it, they just go for it. And this is exactly what President Bukele did. He swam against the tide because he believed that this was in the best interest of his country, which was his primary objective, is to remove the corruption that was destroying the country. I mean, as we all know, El Salvador was the most dangerous country in the world 3 years ago before he decided to make the stand. And so by taking these measures, against all criticisms, because everybody criticized him, obviously, he succeeded. 3 years later, the country's out of debt. The streets are safe. They're safer than almost most countries, I would say. Certainly safer than the United States by a long stretch. And who would have thought, that El Salvador, going from the number one, gang-infested country, to becoming, one of the safest havens to raise a family in, where people are coming back. Salvadorians that have left the country, decades ago, now they're all, coming back, or a large portion of them willingly. They can't wait to go back home. That's a big statement. And people around the world are starting to take notice because the good news spreads. Again against all the criticisms that he's been hit with, not because he's doing something wrong, is because he's casting a spotlight on what they're doing wrong. Like nobody wants to look bad. And so when somebody's doing good and people are praising him, well, you try to make them look terrible so that nobody pays attention to the fact that you're disgusting and corrupt.
Hmm.
So, but even that clearly has failed, and a lot more countries are taking notice. As there's been a few top guys from several countries that have flown down to El Salvador to speak to President Bukele, asking him for tips and guidance on how he did it. I believe primarily the topic of conversations were around security, but that very quickly moves on to other topics, which is more likely to be the money. Making Bitcoin, of all things, the legal tender, first country in the world to do this. That is a historical move, that will never be forgotten. And so seeing that, he told the IMF to essentially go fuck themselves and, paid back, came out of the debt and doesn't need them, while other countries now are starting to take notice like, well, if he did it and it worked and people are happy, well, maybe we should consider it as well. And you're starting to see that. Which countries adopt, the same formula next? It's to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised if I see perhaps countries in the Middle East do this, or other countries that have been traditionally disadvantaged, in the same way El Salvador was historically. Because I mean, they have nothing to lose at this point, but everything to gain
Yeah.
by adopting measures that have clearly proven themselves to be a win.
Yeah. Do you,
That,
so,
that's what I think.
yeah. So do you think that there are what, give or take 200 countries in the world. Do you think that like the G7, like or just the Western nations in general, I guess, the more prosperous will be the last to adopt Bitcoin? Or do you think that that eventually some critical mass of adoption will take place amongst those, to your point, who have very little to lose? and the Western world will sort of end up in the middle of the pack. Like they're going to recognize they're falling behind, but maybe have the wherewithal to take some action because they're gonna lose their status as sort of the prosperous nations to which people have
Mm.
historically fled.
Absolutely. I think that G7 will categorically be the last people to do any good. I mean, they are the leading example of the corruption and the problems in the world, and doing everything to destroy the narrative that, countries like El Salvador are starting to put out there. So I genuinely believe that they will not be adopting this wholeheartedly, but in fact, at some point, like you said, because of critical mass, will be forced to do it. Whether they
Yeah,
like it or not, they will have no choice but to comply and abandon, their old ways. I mean, separation of money and state. When Bitcoin becomes the global standard, there's no room for any of that rubbish that's going on now. So that's
yeah.
what I think is going to happen. But will it happen willingly?
No,
Categorically not.
kicking and screaming.
No way.
Yeah. Well, I remember because I remember seeing so many. So I came to Bitcoin in like 2022. And so like my first year was just a total bear market. I don't remember what El Salvador started when they adopted it, what the price was. But I know that for a year at least, I mean, they were getting so much flack. They're underwater on this investment in Bitcoin, all of that. And they have been, I know that they didn't buy at 69, or I mean, that wasn't like where they started. And at 15, they were just getting hammered with bad press. But then at some point, maybe in the 30s or 40s, I thought I remember people saying, hey, they're net profit on this, decision. I can't even imagine what the media is going to be saying when Bitcoin's at 250,000 or a million. What a genius decision this will look like.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think I've mentioned this before. I'll reiterate it for the record one more time. I genuinely believe that in the not so distant future, it will become criminal to do anything that risks jeopardizing the Bitcoin network.
Hmm.
We're going to go from, calling it names, making it illegal, giving it all these hit pieces, to protecting it by law, because that's how involved nation states will become in Bitcoin, because
Yeah.
it's the only thing they can trust. They clearly don't trust each other,
Hmm.
so I don't see them adopting any other standard other than one that is completely trustless, and one that they know with 100% certainty their quote unquote enemies cannot have an advantage over them because of it.
Yeah.
And there's
No,
and there's not and there's nothing else.
it's crazy yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to be right ultimately because the game theory will play out that way. It's crazy to imagine that day coming though, that these nations who have been so hostile toward Bitcoin, or even just like in the United States, you could say that they've been hostile because Gary Gensler he was took him kicking and screaming to approve the ETFs. But at the same time, we've always had like a cohort of pro Bitcoin, like some of the more conservative members of Congress. We've had it would be hard to say that the US is anti Bitcoin or anti crypto. It's like individual people and groups that have been, but it's still just a wild thought exercise to imagine, the government's mining Bitcoin intentionally in order to help protect the network because they now have a vested interest.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, I mean, Bitcoin is as American as it gets, but
Yeah,
it's as American. It's not as US government as it gets. It's
yeah,
as American as it gets.
yeah,
When you have a criminal organization that's been doing whatever the hell it wants for decades, warmongering, essentially doing whatever it wants. And then here comes along this little unknown thing called Bitcoin that's supposed to be a disruptive technology. Initially, obviously, you laugh at it because you're like, "What is this fucking thing? It doesn't mean anything. It's just gonna die out just like any other fad." And so you ignore it. Mistake number one, because statistically most things do die out. They're fads. But once in a while, along comes this little thing that doesn't die out, and this one turned out to be specifically one of them. And it went unnoticed for the first few years, and then it grew so much while going unnoticed, and now it's at a point where you cannot stop this. And they finally realize Oh shit, now what do we do? Well, now there's nothing for you to do other than adopt it, because if you don't adopt it, it will force you to adopt it because of mass pressure. You may not want to adopt it, but globally speaking, there are a lot more places that will, and population pressure. There's 8 billion people, compared to you, you're like a little speck in the dust. So, the masses will vote. And I think they will vote with something that benefits their lives now that they realize that for decades they've been duped and
Yeah.
robbed, and it's not stopping. In fact, it's continuing to get worse. So, the suddenly is going to happen very quickly.
Yeah.
My gut feeling tells me we might start seeing something this year.
Mm.
When this year, obviously nobody knows. I don't have a crystal ball, but when you have that sixth sense that keeps eating at you,
Hmm.
that's my sixth sense. I have a feeling 2024, at some point, something's going to crack, and that's it. It's going to start the cascading effect in the same way that happened in Lebanon. Happened, one afternoon over nothing. Some
Yeah.
idiot in the government decided he wanted to tax WhatsApp conversations. As moronic as that sounds, that was the trigger. As soon as he opened his mouth, that's to tell you how corrupt they are. So nothing would surprise me anymore to the as far as the extremities of corruption go.
Yeah.
Nothing. So it's going to be something. Someone's going to do something as stupid as thinking they're going to tax a WhatsApp conversation, and it's going to trigger like that cascading effect like no one's ever seen. Because Lebanon is like a drop in the water compared to the United States in size. So you have that thing blow up the same way it did in Lebanon in the United States. God help us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think hands will be forced. I think you're spot on. Hey, let's move on to the next one here. So this is I mean it's pretty incredible um I mean just the wave of inflows into the ETFs. So
Mhm,
this was for just this week in 2 days we had almost $1.5 billion in inflows. I mean, the fact that this is months after the launch and it was perhaps the most successful ETF launch in history anyway. I mean, we are seeing massive amounts of money entering these ETFs. Now, obviously, at the Bitcoin way, we have our opinions about the ETFs. They are a distant, distant second to anything real Bitcoin, self custody, full sovereignty. But I think it's an indication of the tides turning
mhm,
on. And actually, I saw a meme recently, and it was like these four waves stacked on top of each other, and it was like ETFs, and then it's like wealth advisors and pension funds, and then central banks. And so like the concept was like you're going to have people come into the ETFs, and eventually you're going to have the wealth advisors telling their clients to allocate 1% or 5% over time or whatever it is, uh, to eventually working its way up to your point where we were just talking about these central banks coming in. So I think it's like it's a leading indicator of where we're headed. I guess there's not a like a specific question. Do you anticipate though that these inflows are going to continue, and do you pay attention to this at least as like a proxy for where we're at with Bitcoin adoption?
I pay attention to it just because it makes headline news, almost every day now, as to how much money is coming into it. I don't particularly care about ETFs in their current format, at least in the United States. It's complete rubbish. But if you're like one of those regulated institutions, that is restricted, but what you can do with your money, where else are you going to put it that actually makes you money? You're going to put
Hmm.
it in bonds or treasuries? You'd have to be insane.
Right.
It's a lose lose. So now that more of these people understand that they literally have no option if they want to make money, Bitcoin is the way to go. So they're clearly going to start, whether they accept it or not, they're going to do it, and slowly and slowly and slowly, and then boom, then you get that big massive inflow. But one thing that's interesting about the ETFs is the way they've been introduced in other countries, comparatively to the US. I believe it. Well, I think it was Japan or China. I can't remember which one. And recently Australia, their ETFs are in kind. That means
Mm,
that somebody initially investing in an ETF can actually withdraw in Bitcoin. That's a huge difference between what it is in the United States and elsewhere. And I have a feeling that at some point, as the popularity of these things continue to grow, it's going to force the US to comply to these rules.
yeah.
And can you imagine? And that's when the impact of the ETF, in my opinion, will really be something worth paying attention to. Because can you imagine all these like multi-billionaires that have invested God knows how much, what percentage of their portfolio in a currently an ETF, which is purely, fiat based. They start understanding Bitcoin, and
Hmm.
they all of a sudden have an option to withdraw to Bitcoin in self-custody and outside of that worthless system. That's when you're going to see, the Godzilla God candle.
Hmm.
That's where you'll see it, like from 1 minute to the next. Like
Yeah.
I'm expecting this um, at any point now. It's like it's just inevitable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Now in the United States, they will fight it tooth and nail for sure because they want to keep you in their in the fiat system. But again, global pressure. Not everybody is going to copy the United States. Not everybody likes the United States, and certainly doesn't believe that their formula is the right one. Clearly, as
Hmm.
you can see, by how they're introducing their own variations of it,
Yeah.
and the free market ultimately votes.
Yeah. It's like it's like as we're beginning to see competition as to how Bitcoin will be adopted in certain
Mhm.
places. And like El Salvador is the pristine example. I mean, they've done it right. They've just made it legal tender. But yeah, Hong Kong came along with their ETFs, and you've got the in-kind, the ability to effectively cash out, so to speak, and,
Mhm.
and access your Bitcoin. And eventually, it is, I think, as more and more people recognize this, governments in particular recognize this as an inevitability, they are forced to offer better and better on ramps into real Bitcoin. Like it's going to be in their interest to encourage their citizenry and for them and for governments themselves to acquire this, to do it the right way. So I've only been in this 2 years, and it feels like forever. I can't imagine for yourself or for like the folks who were in this in 2010, 2011, how long this road has probably felt. But I think you're right. I don't know if it's this year that we start to see that or not. I think once when my friends who are financial advisors, when they start to say, yeah, there's rumor that we're going to recommend like an allocation to Bitcoin, to the ETFs or to self custody, especially if they start to recommend self custody on some level. To me, that's going to be an indication that not just that the tides have turned, but that we're like at an inflection point. And I think the green candle you described is I mean, I can't even imagine what that's going to look like. I think it's in the next few years, though, at the very least.
Who knows, man? I mean, this God candle will come in many variations. It can start off, with one X amount and then X exponentially next year, the year after. Who knows? But it is coming. It is coming, and what you consider exponential this year, maybe eclipse next year, and so that's why it has no top because fiat has no bottom. So, if Bitcoin goes to 500,000 this year, personally, I wouldn't be surprised. If next year it goes up to 3 million, people are like, well, what the hell, man? It was 500,000, now it's 3 million. What's going on? That still wouldn't surprise me. Even if
Hmm.
it went up to $1 billion in the next 5 years, it wouldn't surprise me
Yeah.
because mathematically speaking, there is no value anywhere else. The only thing holding Bitcoin back is ignorance,
Hmm.
people's ignorance. You walk out in the street, nobody has a clue, or they're too lazy to listen, or too lazy to do the work or pay attention. The only thing they have energy for is complaining about how they can't afford anything,
Right.
you know? So the pain is still not big enough.
Yeah. I think we're
But
close to that no longer being the case, though.
we are definitely close to that, and you're right. It does feel a lot longer than it is, especially for me. I mean, again, it comes around to like what got you into Bitcoin. Everybody has their own story.
Hmm.
My story is well known by now, and so when you come from such extremity, you are diving into that rabbit hole, turbocharged, trying to find answers that make sense in order to put together a plan to ensure that this absolutely never ever happens to you again or to anyone else that you care about.
Yeah. Well said. All righty, we got another one. This is sort of a we're inching into clown world now. So bird flu. When the vax comes out, you getting it, Tony?
Yeah, this is the second round of the IQ test for the world. I'm
Yeah,
I'm curious to see how many morons are gonna fall for this rubbish again
yeah,
and go line up like a bunch of clowns to inject themselves with something that's gonna take them out. So we can continue hearing about how hundreds of thousands and millions of people are falling dead left and right because of unknown reasons.
yeah,
As far as I'm concerned, they can take this vaccine and they can shove it. It's not going to come anywhere near me or anywhere near anyone I care about. That's for sure.
yeah. I think we'll see. My hypothesis on this though is that if they go through the same song and dance that they did with COVID, they're going to face resistance that they didn't face before. I think COVID really did wake up a lot of people. I think
Mhm.
there are still a lot of people who are, I mean, I was traveling this past weekend, people wearing masks. It's not most people, but like there's still those people who are at lockstep with government guidelines but it's a lot fewer. I know a lot of people in my life who the COVID vaccine is a huge regret for them. It's like the regret for them and have really opened their eyes to sort of the nonsense. And what's interesting is that they're already, I think, let me, yeah, it's not in this post that I was just showing, but they're already talking about, oh, it's like a 50% survival rate. Like they're really having to up the ante to scare you into because I think they know. They want to have this crisis, but they know that they've already lost a lot of credibility, and so they need it to be so much it needs to be much more dire than COVID was in order to get people who are on the fence to get back on the government bandwagon.
Well, the thing is, COVID opened the world's eyes to the playbook. I mean, these people they're not that smart. They're repetitive.
Hmm.
Whenever they need something, they cause a crisis. So
Right.
you're expecting a crisis. And so they went past the point of no return with COVID. They broke the
Hmm.
mold with that one. And now the resistance to this rubbish, is borderline violent. I mean, you try to come at like me with something like this and you try to force it, one of us is walking away from it. Like
Right.
it's come to that point. And I'm more of the calm ones. I know people that are ready for war, like literal war.
Hmm.
Like if they're faced, doesn't matter who it is. Law enforcement doesn't matter. They
Yeah.
try to force it, they will fight, and one of them will walk away.
Yep.
That's the mindset for a lot more people, which is a little frightening if you think about it. That means
Yeah.
that the patience level, the tolerance level, the allergic reaction is at an all-time high. That if
Hmm.
you it just takes like one of those pin pokes to blow it up. And if they try to push this that way, I don't know, man, how it's going to manifest itself. But
Yeah.
I, for, I, for one, will not be touching this with a 10-foot pole, and I will categorically forbid anyone I care about to do the same.
Agreed. Yeah, I think
You know,
Bitcoiners in particular, but more and more people at large, I think have begun to cultivate the skill of ignoring government and ignoring the mainstream talking points. And so I'm hopeful that this just blows up in their face. Everyone
well,
just
it's the
ignores
easiest
it.
thing. If you know it's bullshit, why do you comply with it?
Yeah.
Regardless of the bird flu or anything else, if you know something is bullshit, why do you comply with it? Because it comes with a badge that it's government issued. So
Hmm.
what?
Yeah. No one cares
Governments
anymore.
are not gods. Like the governments are not gods. These are just like corrupt human beings thinking they can play God. And as long as there's enough morons that just comply out of fear, these things never stop. They only stop when there's genuine pushback. Like in historically, when have you seen freedom won over a cup of coffee or a peaceful dinner?
Yeah,
Never.
yeah, never.
So why would it be different now? Because
Mm,
we're in 2024, because we're supposed to be civilized.
yeah. We're
The attacks are happening one way. That's the difference, is that over the years, they've brainwashed the people to become so compliant and dumb, essentially, and fearful of everything, that to find like a man to stand up and push back is like winning a lottery ticket.
yeah,
It's really ridiculous. But thankfully, that seems to be changing now, because at some point, when you get screwed enough, you have to react. No matter how passive you want to be initially, there comes a point where you can no longer be passive, because it's life or death, literally.
mhm, yep,
So how it plays out, man, obviously I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. I'm just hoping that this time around, if this bullshit does try to make its 2.0 round, that the pushback will be extreme enough to put an end to it permanently.
yeah. If the resistance is broad enough, it doesn't have to be violent because they'll give up because they want to stay in power, and that's how you get unelected or kicked out, or in certain scarier times throughout history,
Yeah, of
that's how
course,
you get
of
the
course.
guillotine.
Nobody, well, nobody wants violence,
Right.
but you have to be prepared for it if it doesn't stop.
Sure.
You can't like sort of like expect they'll take care of it. I don't want to get hurt.
Yep.
You can't have that mindset.
Completely agree. And yeah, to your point, I think we will just have to wait and see how it plays out, but hopefully peacefully.
Yes,
Alrighty.
absolutely.
So last one here. I get my screen up. There we go. So this is the I think we're entering peak clown world if we haven't reached it
Oh
already.
my God.
I wanted to get your opinion on this. Males can live longer if they are castrated, claims researcher. And by the way, the gal who well, maybe that's the point. It's a gal who came out with this research, and hang on, I thought this was funny. I just looked it up again. It says, although intriguing, Bohannon's claims raise many ethical issues and practical considerations as well. Castration is a serious final operation with pronounced consequences for the body and psyche. No kidding.
It's an interesting article. Somebody should write a rebuttal for her. Say females live even longer than castrated males if you staple their vaginas shut.
Yeah, you're not going to see that in the headlines, that's for sure. There's not an attack on, well, there is an attack on femininity, but there's not an attack on femininity in the way that there's an attack on masculinity. Normal being a normal guy is now toxic according to your
That's
favorite
that
research
that
journals.
that's changing now. I think the feminist movement completely destroyed women, and it completely backfired. Whatever narrative they thought they had is, I don't know, man.
Yeah,
To each their own, but whenever you see an unhappy woman, you likely know that she's a pain in the ass somewhere, and
yeah.
which is why she's an unhappy woman.
So just to recap, you won't be getting the bird flu jab and you won't be getting castrated, is what I'm hearing.
100%. 100%.
Good. Glad to hear it. Then we can continue working together happily, Tony.
Absolutely, Michael.
Awesome. All righty, man. Well, hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're looking for self-custody help, go to the bitcoinway.com/podcast. We have a team that is incredibly talented and capable at helping you custody your Bitcoin properly. You're not sharing your other keys, any keys with any third parties. You don't have to KYC yourself. All of the hoops you'd otherwise have to jump through with many solutions. We don't even have to know who you are at all, like us personally. So uh check out the Bitcoin Way. Appreciate your support, everyone. Tony, thank you for coming on again and doing this with me.
Always a pleasure, man.
Always
See you,
fun.
see you next time.
All righty. Cheers.
Cheers.